Welcome to the One Mic, One Voice show, Building the Collective Conscious, a show that is created to give space where your voice, ideas, and informed opinions can be heard, appreciated, and debated. I am Michael Eric Owens, and I'm remote again, folks. We're in this, what can I say? We're still in the pandemic and we're still struggling to make sense of it all. But I am excited to be here with you and we have a great show today. Really great show today. I have always, I guess now I'm concerned, as always, about this movement that we are under. It's not a new movement. We're going to talk about that today. But I want to talk about how to stop a movement. There's a lot going on in our country. There are still protests going on. The coronavirus continues to wreak havoc, I would say, on our country. We are ill prepared to deal with this, but that's a whole nother show. How to stop a movement. I guess I want to say, first of all, that the Black Lives Matter uh, movement, the idea of Black Lives mattering in the sense, has always been. This is not a new concept. I think for some, it's a new concept. It seems new, it seems fresh, but it's not. These aspirations have been around for 401 years. So I want to contextualize that today. But furthermore, I also want to have some pretty stern words for my Black folk. So it might get a little uncomfortable for you today, but we need to speak some truths. We are in a moment, in a time where this requires skill, not ego. This requires humility, not pride. You have to put away your hubris. This is bigger than me, it's bigger than you. That's why it's called a movement. It might get a campaign undertaken by groups of people working together. Groups of people working together. Now, how to stop a movement? There are outside forces and there are inside forces. Outside forces, um, you will never change those forces. Why? Because they work to maintain the status quo. Change is difficult, even on the micro level. It's difficult. It's not easy. Think about on the macro level when you're trying to change a society that has been ingrained in a system that marginalizes Black and Brown people. How difficult is that going to be? Matter of fact, I would say that it is the greatest challenge that this country will ever face is how to change. Whether society has the fortitude, the ability, the courage to change. That's where we're at. A group of people working together, but there's outside forces. And let me help you identify some of these outside forces. You might hear them say things like, what about Black on Black crime? I always am intrigued by that thought, Black on Black crime. Matter of fact, I wrote an article back in '07 about that was titled Black Men Are Vanishing. And it wasn't to indict Black people, it was to highlight the responsibility that we have to ensure that violence does not happen in our community. And matter of fact, I had written in that article the idea that we need to erect monuments for the brothers and sisters, the children, the aunts, the uncles, the mothers, the fathers who were slain, so that we would be reminded of that violence. People didn't really like that idea back then. And we're going to get to some of these, as I call them, pseudo activists today. But these outside forces, you hear them say, well, what about black on black crime? When you talk about police, white officers killing black men and women. Oh, you also hear slavery was a long time ago. I didn't own any slaves, so you just need to get over it. Well, let me say this about that concept. The idea of slavery is servitude. The idea of slavery is second class citizenship, lack of freedom, the inability to have economic equity. The idea of slavery is non access to healthcare, quality healthcare, quality education. The idea of slavery is redlining, being put in a community where you can't get out of. So when you say to me slavery was a long time ago, I say, what is your litmus test? If it is that black and brown people are not being lynched, well, we can see that kind of happening here too. But what is your litmus test? Mine is simply I'm sitting alongside my white brothers and sisters where I should be, where we all should be. You're also here, I have black friends, so what does all this mean? I'm not prejudiced. I don't see color. Well, if you don't see color, then you don't see nature. You don't see the sky. You don't see the beauty and the array of life. To say you don't see color is simply to say you don't see me. Um, you might hear him also say, "All lives matter. All lives matter." Yeah, that just again it takes away from the emphasis of the problem. Nobody is arguing that other lives don't matter. We're saying for too long in this country, black lives have not mattered. And then you hear this thing: there are good cops. So, what does that really mean to Brother George Floyd, to Breonna Taylor, to uh, Brother Sterling, to Walter Scott, uh, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, um, Juan McDonald? What does that mean when you say there are good cops? Well, it's simply saying I don't want to hear your argument. So these outside forces, you're never going to change them. Now, I hear the critic, and I'm criticized for this all the time. And believe it or not, I am an optimist, but I'm a realist. I've lived for a while and I've seen things. I understand things. I've been through some things, and I've realized that, there's, the platitudes and the sympathies and the I will pray for you. Uh, it doesn't bring about change. Now, I know we're on Sunday morning and people will say prayer changes things, and I agree, but we've been praying for 401 years. So obviously, we need to do more than pray. So these outside forces, in my opinion, you will never change. They will never come to the party. They are the ones in opposition to this movement, to this campaign undertaken by a group of people working together. Black lives matter. Okay. You see, when you add the movement on there, it takes on a modern connotation. The Black Lives Matter movement. There's been movements before, and at the central of those movements were Black Lives Matter. Okay. I love the phrase. I love the coin phrase. I'm glad that they got it on their shirts and hats, and they got it on their Facebook pic and pictures, and I love that. But Black lives have always mattered, and there's always been a movement to ensure that the rest of the country recognizes that. You see, although Black Lives Matter movement is an organization, um, but it has been a movement since the Dred Scott case. And what we're going to do here, we're going to take a listen to this video, and then we're going to come back. The Dred Scott case, if you're not aware of that, you need to be, because this was really one of the first, and I'm sure you could point to others, but one of the first where Black people said Black Lives Matter. Let's take a listen to this video.
My great-great-grandfather was born on a plantation in Southampton, Virginia. He was born to the Blow family. They eventually moved to St. Louis. At this point, they had debts, and they had to sell something to cure those debts. My great-great-grandfather was purchased by an army surgeon.
The slave is taken into the Wisconsin Territory in what is now Minnesota.
And he met and married a young lady. Slaves were prohibited actually to marry. So it's pretty special that they actually had a wedding. Brought back to St. Louis with his family. At that point, he had something unique. Missouri had a law that said once free, always free.
And Wisconsin Territory is free soil, no slavery.
If a slaveholder were to take a slave and live in the North, then that slave would be liberated.
They were no longer a slave.
But their owner refuses to free them. And in 1846, the slaves enter this courtroom to seek their freedom.
At first it was just about their family, but ultimately it was about a nation. And my ancestor was Dred Scott.
A jury of 12 white men set Dred and Harriet Scott free.
It was a wonderful day, but it was short-lived.
Scott's owner appeals the verdict.
And then the Supreme Court of Missouri changed the precedent of Missouri to say, it didn't free him, and that's when he brought his federal action.
Dred Scott's case lands in the U.S. Supreme Court. The court was stacked against Scott. Of the 9 justices, 5 were from slave states, and a 6th from Pennsylvania also favored slavery. The justices voted 7-2 against Scott, and they did something the framers never imagined. They invented a constitutional right to own slaves.
Some of the worst jurisprudence by our United States.
That was the classic example of the Supreme Court taking upon itself to do what it thought was right and not adhere to the text of the Constitution as it was written.
In his decision, Chief Justice Taney writes,
Negroes have been regarded as beings of inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race. And the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit.
What Dred Scott did was to say, yes, they said all men are created equal, but they didn't mean it.
In terms of how it feels now as I'm saying this to you, it angers me. How can one man tell another man that he's benefiting me by enslaving me?
I can't imagine that anything could be worse.
And that blacks could never be citizens for as long as they lived in America.
Because you cannot possibly be, under any circumstances, a citizen of the United States if you're black and you're descendant from slaves.
Taney thought he was going to resolve the slavery controversy forever by basically saying, stop arguing about this question, it's settled. But he was wrong. You don't settle a controversy like that simply by saying, I'm right, you're wrong.
Within 3 months of the Dred Scott decision, they did get their freedom. And they did not get it through the courts, but they got it from the hand of the children of their original owners. Dred and Harriet were simple people. The fact that they were born in slavery did not deny them their humanity, nor any human desires as anyone else would have. Their greatest desire was freedom.
The laws still weren't living up to that ideal. In fact, The Dred Scott case was a big step backwards.
Most northern states were content to let the southern states be the southern states, and they weren't prepared to do anything about slavery in the South.
Until the Dred Scott decision.
And that led to a grave perception of a threat. The North finally cared about slavery in a way they hadn't before. And then we know what happened after that.
Between December 1860 and the following June, 11 states secede from the Union and ignite the worst constitutional crisis in American history.
Dred Scott. Why did Dred Scott sue? Because his life mattered. Because the Constitution and those who were put in power to ensure that the Constitution would apply to all people didn't consider Black people to be equal. Matter of fact, Justice Tooney said basically that you can never be a citizen and that you will always be a slave. So what I'm trying to say is Black Lives Matter has always been at the core of trying to bring equity to Black people and to bring awareness of the value of Black life to those who deemed it less. Again, this is nothing new. I understand for some of you the passion and the engagement is something you find yourself in the midst of, and you want to see things change. But this struggle has been going on for a very long time. This idea of, look at me, I matter too. Not that I matter more than you, but I matter too. The Black Lives Matter is an organization, but it has been a movement, as I've mentioned. It's a campaign, again, undertaken by groups, by a group of people working together. It's a diverse group. It's not centralized, meaning that there is no one sitting on the Black Lives Matter throne giving out instructions, giving orders. It is both philosophical and practical. Philosophical in the sense that one understands the value that it simply has for being human, for being born of a woman, for having the same genetic makeup as the rest of those who inhabit this planet. It's philosophical. It is in the mind and the heart of Black and brown people, but it is practical because the movement says something must be done. The idea of Black life must have value. The idea of the contributions and the talent of Black people should be acknowledged. Black culture is American culture. If you take away Black culture, what would America be without its music, without its dance, even without its churches, without his orators? What would America be? So what I'm saying to you, it is practical. Something has to be done, but the Black Lives Matter movement today is focused on social justice. Social justice. And that encompasses a lot. Really, it does. But you have to understand the message and the focus. It is a human idea, Brother Medgar Evers. You know, the civil rights activist in Mississippi who was assassinated said, "You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea." It is the human idea of freedom, equality, being treated fairly, being seen and heard and valued. It's a human idea. No one born in this world and grows up would think differently. It's a human idea that we all share philosophically, but not practically. It demands America accountability. Dr. King says, instead of honoring the sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. It's accountability, this movement, this idea, this philosophical idea, this Black Lives Matter concept holds America accountable. We are in the day of reckoning, a day where the symbols of racism are coming down and being challenged. The day where people can no longer spew their poison on the airwaves through social media without consequences. It's a day of reckoning. It's a day where Black and brown and white people of good faith are saying no longer. We've had enough. Times have changed. We need to evolve as a people in our thinking, in our behavior, in the way that we interact with one another. The days of old, the antiquated way of thinking and doing and leading is coming to an end. Now, I know there are some, again, outside forces that are against this sort of movement. They have been against this movement since day one. But there's inside forces. You remember I said that when we got started, I was going to challenge some of my folks in the community, and I'm going to do that because I think while we cannot do anything about the outside forces, we can definitely do something about the inside forces. What do I mean by that? I mean individuals, meaning Black folks, can sabotage the movement. Let me repeat that. Black folk, brown people, sabotage the movement, premise views. Every Black at Trump rally, every Black. Now you might say, well, hold on, Michael, now there's some Blacks with, listen, in my opinion, you might as well attend a KKK rally. Yes, I'm going to say that because what spews out of his mouth is racism and division and hate. And to attend a rally like that, you co-signing for it. Those are white supremacist views. People like Candace Owens, that diamond and filth or silk, whatever she calls herself. And every Black pastor that meets with Trump. What? How can you be a minister of the gospel? When Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me the drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. How can you be a minister of that good news and meet with a guy that has been charged, right, by the Justice Department for discrimination, that has countless women that have accused him of sexual assault, that have come out and called black countries S-hole countries. How can you sit with him and come out grinning and smiling? You might as well get on the table and do a jig for him. This is ridiculous. Because people will say, well, see, the black pastors, they're meeting with Trump, is open, he's open to the black pastors. How do you stop a movement? Those on the outside are looking for any excuse, any wrong word, any wrong move to discredit you, discredit the movement, discredit the value of black life. Let me just name a couple more. Ben Carson, Clarence Thomas, forever. Guy that want to do away with affirmative action, but benefited from it. Kanye West. Oh my God. Why y'all messing with Kanye? Leave Kanye alone. Slavery was a choice. Come on. Are you serious? We have to do better. We have to do better. And then we have these, and we're talking about on the inside. We have these, I mentioned earlier, these pseudo activists. Those that have taken this opportunity to get in front of the camera. Where have you been? That's my question to you. You see, right now, it's popular to be an activist. Everyone wants the title. Matter of fact, there should be a school for activists. It's popular to wear the shirt. It's popular to wear the hat, to have the hashtag, and but where have you been? Those of us have been in this struggle for decades. It wasn't popular. When I was called a radical, when I was told if racism would go away if I just stopped talking about it. When I was told that slavery was a long time ago and you're just being a victim. Where were you then, pseudo activists? These black folk now that are quick to get in front of the camera. Somehow you have become the surrogate for the black community. Where have you been? And furthermore, what have you done? Where have you been? What have you done? You see, no, Michael Jordan just didn't become Michael Jordan because he's decided to step on the basketball court. He became Michael Jordan because he put in the hard work. He became Michael Jordan because there were times when people didn't believe in him. You remember he got cut. He became Michael Jordan because he was determined to learn, to get better, to be mentored. He put in the time. And what happened? He became Michael Jordan. As I would say, the GOAT. The greatest of all time. But the problem is with these pseudo activists, they see the lights, they see the camera. Yeah. And it is their agenda that will stop the movement because they're not ready. Where have you been? And what about these docile and compliant black folk? And I know I'm being hard today, but I'm being realistic because this is our moment. We have to maintain the momentum, and we have to be aware of those who will prevent us, trick us, con us. I remember at one of my jobs, there was a gentleman that saw I had a Malcolm X poster up. And on my wall, I had Barack Obama, I had Doc King, I had Frederick Douglass, Malcolm X. I'm surrounded by inspiration. And he said to me, "Man, you got that Malcolm X poster up?" I said, "Yeah, the problem? He said, oh, no, you got to take that down. I said, what? I got to take it down. He said, yeah, because you're going to make a whole lot of people nervous. I said, well, I don't care about making people nervous. I said, plus it's my office and I can put up what I want to put up in my office. He said to me some words I will never forget. This is in Oklahoma. He said to me, you need to know your place. My place. Docile individuals will say to us, you pushing too hard. That's too tough. That's going to offend somebody. Listen, I have been offended all my life. I have been struggling all my life. I have been harassed the majority of my life. I have been police racially profiled more times than I can ever remember. And because some folk are going to feel uncomfortable, well, get on the bandwagon. We are uncomfortable. Black and brown people have been uncomfortable in this country for 401 years. I think you can be uncomfortable for a while if you want things to change. Now, the ignorant Black. And you could probably, and again, I'm not saying that in a despairing way. I'm saying that a lack of knowledge, right? Because when you call somebody ignorant, they immediately get offended. Ignorance means you just have a lack of knowledge. And so the ignorant Black, and this, you can kind of correlate this to the pseudo activists, the one that does not know their history, has not put in the time or the effort. Johnny come latelys to the party that seems to think they're the maid of honor. Okay. Because when you get out there and you begin to articulate yourself, you don't know what you're talking about. You hurt the movement because you're not ready. Yes. And we have many rising up today that are getting behind the microphone that are hurting the movement. Folks, we're going to take a break. I've been talking for a while. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into some examples of folks that are simply not ready. They simply, get this, are not ready. Hang in there. We'll be right back.
Oklahoma Humanities Brain Box podcast uses the humanities to take listeners on a deep dive into the issues affecting American society and culture. Join some of Oklahoma's most interesting and knowledgeable humanities scholars to explore how history, literature, ethics, philosophy, and other humanities fields inform our understanding of current events and the human experience. And to find the Brain Box podcast, simply search Brain Box Podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Google Play, and any other podcasting library. If you have any ideas or comments rattling around in your noggin, email us at brainbox@okhumanities.org.
This is Dr. Laura Gillott, and when I listen to podcasts, I always listen to the One Mic, One Voice show.
Black lives do matter, and they've mattered since the origin of this country. The quest to make Black lives matter in the eyes and the faces, in the institution of this country, have been the labor of Black people for generations. When will Black lives matter? Again, you want to call it a movement? It's always been here. We may be seeing something on a global scale that we have not seen in the world, but keep in mind the foundation has been laid. Some of you out here seem to think that you are creating a foundation. No, you're building upon a foundation of, oh my goodness. I mean, I don't have the time to take you through history to talk to people like, bring up people like Harvin Revel or John Lynch, bring up other folks that throughout history have tried to be a voice for Black lives. Dr. King, of course, and A. Philip Randolph, Rosa Parks, and Huey P. Newton, and all the writers that have Ellison and Baldwin and Wright, and the list goes on and on. Dr. West, Skip Gates, Dr. Dyson. The list goes on and on throughout history. Plessy versus Ferguson, the Little Rock Nine. The list goes on and on. People have been screaming throughout generation after generation that Black lives matter. I want to look again at these inside forces. The first one we're going to look at, there's going to be two we're going to listen to. The first one is Don Lemon and actor Terry Crews. Crews, yeah, he's an interesting brother. I first had issues with Terry when he threw Gabriella Union under the bus with her suit now of harassment. And he made the statement, well, I've never been treated like that. This is the most diverse cast I've been at. So obviously, because, he was not treated that way, she could not have been treated that way. So that was my first issue. And then recently, Terry had something to say. I want to listen. He's on the CNN with Don Lemon. Let's take a listen.
All right, everybody, please listen to this segment because actor and activist Terry Crews facing backlash for tweeting, "We must ensure Black Lives Matter doesn't morph into Black Lives Better." Here's how he explained it. Are all white people bad? No. Are all Black people good? No. Knowing this reality, I stand on my decision to unite with good people, no matter the race, creed, or ideology. Given the number of threats against this decision, I also decide to die on this hill. Terry Crews joins me now. Terry, man, You stepped in it. You say that you're willing. You say you're willing to die on this hill. You've taken a lot of heat for this. Explain what you were thinking and why it's so important that you die on this hill.
Well, again, I wanted to bring up the fact that there are some very, very militant type forces in Black Lives Matter. And what I was issuing was a warning. It's one of those things where I've been a part of different groups, I've been a part of different things, and you see how extremes can really can go far and can go wild. And then when you issue a warning, and when a warning is seen as detrimental to the movement, how can you ever have checks and balances? In the 60s and 70s, airplanes went down all the time. And the reason they found out why they did was because the pilots could never be questioned. And when you have the leaders of the Black Lives Movement who are now talking about, if we don't get our demands, we're going to burn it down. Other Black people who are talking about working with other whites and other races, they're being viewed as sellouts or called Uncle Toms. You start to understand that you are now, being controlled. You're not being treated as loved. You're actually being control. Someone wants to control the narrative. And I viewed it as a very, very dangerous self-righteousness that was developing that, that really viewed themselves as better. It was almost a supremacist move.
Let me jump in,
where
Terry.
they viewed that their Black lives mattered a lot more than mine.
Okay, so let me jump in here. There's a lot that you said. You think if Black Lives Matter is, you said you think it's an extreme movement? Because it's now part of the...
No, this is the thing. It's a great mantra. It's a true mantra. Black lives do matter. But when you're talking about an organization, you're talking about the leaders, you're talking about the people who are responsible for putting these things together.
I got you. So let me, but
different thing.
Terry, you realize that even during the civil rights movement that Dr. King was seen as extreme. That movement was seen as extreme. To people who don't want to make change, movements are seen as extreme. You can paint them easily as an extreme when they are not.
This is very true. But also, when you're talking about MLK, you're talking about Nelson Mandela, and even Malcolm X, they all realized that you had to have a non-racial component to these kind of movements, or there will be resentment. There will be get back. There will be, one of these people will tend to, listen, I don't want to move from one oppressor to the next. And one thing that really
who's the next oppressor? Who's the next oppressor?
Oh, when I describe this, when you look in the city of Chicago, there are 9 children who died by gun violence, by black on black gun violence, from June 20th all the way to today. And you're talking about, even with the Atlanta child murders, there were 28 kids who died in 2 years. You're talking about a month, and you have 9 black kids, and the Black Lives Matter movement has said nothing about this.
What does that have to do with equality, though, Terry? I don't understand what that has to do with equality, because listen, there's crime. There are people in those communities those people aren't just being nonchalant about gun violence. I lived in Chicago. There are many people who are working in those communities to try to get rid of the gun violence. The gun culture in this country is prevalent, but I don't understand what that has to do with a movement that's for equality for black people. It's not mutually exclusive that if you care about equality for black people, that somehow you're going to stop random violence or, unfortunately, kids from being shot. It just seems like apples and oranges.
It's not that way. This is the thing, Don. Black people need to hold other black people accountable. I said the same thing. This is the Black America's version of the Me Too movement. If anything is going to change, we ourselves need to look at our own communities and look at each other and say, this thing cannot go down. And this is the thing, too. There are a lot of great, great people there who are held hostage by people who literally are running these neighborhoods with violence and then claiming that Black Lives Matter. When you look at the parents of these little kids who are saying, hey, man, why aren't they speaking up for me, too? And then this is what I'm saying. When I look at this whole thing about, it's about who is controlling the narrative. It's got to be all Black Lives Matter. And what's happened is that because I even challenged it, because I even questioned and warned people,
Terry,
I became sick. Like if I told you to wear a mask,
but Terry,
they want to kick you out.
You're a high-profile person. You're writing things out there. You know you're going to get backlash. You know people are going to respond to what you're saying on Twitter. So I don't think you should be surprised by that. I have a skin as tough as an armadillo because of what I do, and I think maybe you should adapt that. But here's what I have to say. The Black Lives Matter movement was started because it was talking about police brutality. If you want an all Black Lives Matter movement that talks about gun violence in communities, including, black communities, then start that movement with that name. But that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. It's not an all-encompassing. So if you're talking about, if someone started a movement that said, cancer matters, and then someone comes in and says, why aren't you talking about HIV? It's not the same thing. We're talking about cancer. So the Black Lives Matter movement is about police brutality and injustice in that manner, not about what's happening in black neighborhoods. There are people who are working on that issue, and if you want to start that issue, why don't you start it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
But when you look at the organization, police brutality is not the only thing they're talking about.
I know that, but I agree, but that's not what the Black Lives Matter movement is about, Terry. Black Lives Matter is about police brutality and about criminal justice. It's not about what happens in communities when it comes to crime, black on black crime. People who live near each other, black people, kill each other. Same as whites. 80-some% of white people are killed by white people because of proximity.
Very true.
It's the same thing with black people.
But
that
again,
happens in every single
I just have
neighborhood.
to mention,
But that doesn't, again, I'm not saying that's not important that those kids died, but it's a different movement.
Listen, I understand what you're saying. I totally understand. It is about police brutality. That should never be accepted.
Yeah.
I am not saying that that's not it, but there's more there.
Okay.
And when I look at, if they have more on their agenda, we need to ask them about what else is on that agenda other than police brutality. And that's all I'm doing. Questioning, warning, watching. And if that bothers you, now that bothers me. Because if I can't warn you, we are equal. If we're equal, I should be able to say something as equal.
I gotta go.
You know, I've had enough of Terry Crews. Let's unpack that for a minute, just for a minute. Remember, I'm talking about inside forces. Notice that Don Lemon, first of all, said he's an actor and an activist. So I guess that title is easily, if you speak out, you're an activist. You know, maybe we need to define who an activist is. I guess anybody that speaks out nowadays, I guess you're an activist. Given the backdrop that I shared with you about Brother Terry, it's not shocking. It's not shocking that here he wants to be relevant because what he's talking about is complete nonsense. Black people, this is when Black people victimize Black people. Black people, we need to hold Black people accountable. As if no one in the Black community is concerned about the violence. I know people, I know organizations that have been working to reduce violence in Black communities for a long time. They have been on the forefront of this issue. This is what Bill Cosby did. Matter of fact, Bill Cosby came to my city, Milwaukee, and just, oh man, he was terrible in the way he talked to those people there. How he made all of it their fault. Don's quoted the statistic. I don't have to say it. It's proximity of who you live with, who you're around. There's outrage over the loss of Black life by somebody that looks like them. Absolutely. But that's not the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not. And to conflate the two, again, will deviate us from our message. There is no one movement that encompasses everything. That's why you had the New Left movement. That's why you have the LGBTQ plus movement. You have the feminist movement, the Me Too movement. These movements are focused in an area. Now, social justice, again, I will say it's systemic. It's a lot. But to say, why are they not being outraged because of Black on Black crime? Again, I told you that's someone on the outside that you're never convinced. And you're never convinced, Terry. I mean, it's a waste of time to even having on there. He said that the leaders are militant. Militant. What is the militancy in wanting equality? Where is the militancy in demanding that America live up to its promise? If you say you're going to do something for me and I hold you accountable, What you mad at me for? You said you were going to do it. America, as King says, giving us a bad check. Militant. See, this is what happens when people get uncomfortable. Right? I've been called militant. Militant. Why? Because I'm sharing with you the truth of our history. I'm somehow militant. And then this idea that, has he been looking? This idea that if blacks work with white folks and Latino folks and Asian folks, they're Uncle Tom and they're what? Have you been looking at the protests? It's diverse. It's a rainbow. The fact is that Terry Crews has a problem. And his problem is that he wants to be relevant in this moment. He doesn't want to be part of the moment. He wants to be relevant in the moment. To be relevant, his own argument says that I'm so important that you need to listen to me. Let me tell you, this movement is militant. And why is this movement not speaking out on this? Why don't you be part of the movement? See all the positive things that are happening. Again, I will say this, demand, right, for change is never easy. It's never easy. Brother Arthur says, let's put together the effort into coming together to have our own community, economy, attorneys, law enforcement to be able to govern and enforce what needs to be done and to establish a true culture to counter the culture of those that have oppressed us. You see, this is a hard truth that Arthur brings up, a very hard truth. And I have shared it with some, but I think many will have a difficult time with it. The truth is that in order for true change to come, in some of these decision-making positions, when it comes to where tax dollars go, well, who get hired, as far as leadership, director positions, and CEO positions, and loan officer positions at banks, it's going to have to be black and brown people in charge. That's a hard truth. He said, well, hold on, Mike, hold on. No. Listen, white males in this country have had basically 401 years to get it right. How much longer do they want? How much longer? We've been told to work with them. We've told that reforms are coming. We've been told that. And we've been patient. But yet, nothing changes. Matter of fact, it gets worse. So until we have a Black Wall Street again, or black folks get engaged in the mainstream of society that have power to make decisions, not to ask, but to make decisions, change will not come. He said, well, what do you mean? Listen, you cannot have the same people in charge that have for years placated the system and kept the status quo, and all of a sudden now they want to change it. It's not going to happen. It's a fool's dream. You know, Prince said it's in Mr. Man's song. It's time for you to share the land. As Prince would say, we tired of y'all. The reality is, black folks have to be in charge to make the decisions that affect their lives. For 401 years, somebody else has been in charge, and what has happened? You know, I want to look at one more with Don King. One more with Don King. Let's take a listen to this and we'll come back.
I agree with that. You cannot fall for this president trying to divide people. So if someone says, oh, this is going to go way too far, well, how far is this going to go? Just say, no, that's not what we're doing here. You cannot fall. What we're trying to do is learn about each other. We're trying to put history in the right context. We're trying to, this is going to go way too far. I agree with that. You cannot fall for this president trying to divide people. So if someone says, oh, this is going to go way too far, well, how far is this going to go? Just say, no, that's not what we're doing. A lot of what you've been taught, what we're trying to do is learn about each other. Propaganda. And some things you need to unlearn so that you can become a better citizen, and that the promise of what America is available to all. Why not have the mindset of, well, maybe we should be taking down some of these statues?
Yeah, engage the fear.
Exactly.
Engage the fear.
But people are afraid
to change. Where does that come from? Where does it end?
Yeah.
But that's not coming from a place of logic. Nobody's saying, well, that it never ends. Yeah, it does end, first of all, because what you're dealing with is a time in history where slavery was okay, and how you reconcile that with where you want to be. It's not about a race. It's about proper place. Yeah. And fear frustrates that effort. But Chris, they're coming for all of us. They're coming for everything. Being white is now bad.
But it's not.
That's just what he's preaching,
right? But it's not just the Trumpers, as you say, right? It's not just the Trump apologists and the Trump supporters. It's very well-meaning liberals as well who are feeling these things. And if you're having those feelings, then maybe that means that you have a conscience about it, and that's actually the right feeling to have, and you should be engaged in a discussion. But here's the thing. Jesus Christ, if that's who you believe in, Jesus Christ, admittedly was not perfect when he was here on this earth. So why are we deifying the founders of this country, many of whom owned slaves? And in the Constitution, the original one, they didn't want, they put slavery in there, that slavery should be abolished because it was the way the king wanted. And then the Congress said, no way. And so they had to come up with an alternative about 3/5 of a man.
Well, they knew
so,
that they had an inconsistency with
there
their
you
logic.
Go. So
all
they're not
men
perfect.
are created equal,
they're not
except
perfect.
these men.
We have to stop deifying them. And so, yes, they did some great things. And they created a constitution and a blueprint for us. That wasn't perfect at the time, and that's good, but they weren't perfect either. And so as Americans, all of us should come together and have these conversations and get together and stop letting someone divide us. No one is perfect. Nothing is perfect, not even the founding fathers.
Nothing human is perfect. We are all fallible, especially people are limited by their time. There's no question about that. But here's the good news. Clarity is a good thing.
Okay. Don makes some very good arguments. But you know what was taken away from that whole conversation is Jesus himself, admittedly, is not perfect. This is what I'm talking about when we begin to articulate why these things need to happen. What does Jesus have to do with the symbols of racism? Absolutely nothing. So the conversation goes, the far-right Christian base just went after Don because he said Jesus wasn't perfect. Everything else he said about unity, about slavery, about even iconizing these traitors was true. But Jesus, you see, I was saying it's the passion and the outrage. While it is important, what's more important is strategy. Dr. King, in his life, I think was somewhat guilty of this as well. King's opposition to the war provoked criticism from members of Congress, the press, and from his civil rights colleagues, who argued that expanding his civil rights message to include foreign affairs would harm the Black freedom struggle in America. Now, y'all know I love Doc King. Love him to death. He's my hero. Definitely at the top of the list. But even himself, what did they used that against King to discredit the movement? Was it justified? Do I agree with King? Absolutely. Human rights is a global right. However, freedom in the Black struggle was the message. Deshaun Jackson plays for the Philadelphia Eagles. And he recently posted something on his Instagram page. This is an athlete. Again, we know athletes are coming out now and they're activists. And while I appreciate their voices, we have to be careful. He posted something on his Instagram that was contributed to Hitler. Now, supposedly, Deshaun was talking about Black empowerment and Black people coming together, and kind of what Arthur was talking about. That's what he said in retrospect. He didn't contextualize this this particular quote that he shared on Instagram. This quote says that saying that Black people were the real children of Israel, and that white Americans would be terrified to know that they have been mistreating and discriminating and lynching them. So, of course, it's anti-Semitic. It's clearly on his face. And again, here is an individual that wants to step out, that wants to be a voice, that wants to be part of something that says, you know what? I have some things I want to say. Remember, we're talking about what can stop a movement. Just like Jesus, what does Hitler have to do with the movement? Has absolutely nothing to do. Matter of fact, the only thing they're talking about and all that he said was, guess what? He quoted Hitler. And again, then you offend those who have been our allies. Oh man, from day one. From day one. And then we have Stephen Jackson. Stephen Jackson is he's a retired NBA analyst. I like Stephen. He's a good brother. And he came to Deshaun's defense. And he basically co-signed on everything Deshaun said. Now, Stephen is supposedly, well, not supposedly, he was a good friend of George Floyd. Matter of fact, they look so much alike. If you see two pictures, they considered themselves twins. They met, I believe, when Stephen was in college, and they built a really strong relationship. And Stephen went down to Minnesota when all of this was going on and was genuine in his regards and his support of the family. And he's been thrust into this moment. And so Stephen says, and we're going to be closing up here in a second, but I want to just listen to this. This is Shannon Sharp, basically responding to the conversation he had with Stephen Jackson. So remember how to stop a movement. Let's listen to Brother Shannon.
I spoke to Stacks yesterday, Skip, and I called him. And I'm like, bro, what are you doing?
So you're 2 for 2.
Yeah,
2 days in a row. You talked to Deshaun, now you talked to Steve.
Sometimes I feel like Dr. Phil without the pay.
I got it.
Skip, I was like, Stacks, what are you doing?
Yep.
He's like, man, I said, you doubling down? I was like, what are you doubling down on? Man, at first he said, I was upset because the Eagles released a statement as strong as they did for Deshaun, but they didn't release a statement very similar to when Riley Cooper uttered what he said.
That is true.
And I said, when I spoke to you before you went out to see go to Minnesota and deal with the George Floyd situation, I said, what did I tell you? I said, emotion. I say some emotion is good, but only if it's controlled emotion. I say, Stack, you can double down on fact, and as long as you repeat facts, you'll be right. If you double down on emotion, you'll be wrong every time you double down on it. I say, Stack, you're wrong. I said, you're doubling down on everything that Deshaun Jackson said. Instead of, he's like, well, you know what? And as he said in CNN, he could have been more clear. I said, you and Deshaun Jackson could have spoke about black empowerment without ever mentioning Hitler. First of all, he didn't even say that.
No, he didn't say that. It has been attributed to him.
Yes. I say, Stacks, in a situation like this, I say, you're a voice, you're a powerful voice now, and people are looking to take pot shots and pick you off. Don't sabotage what you built. There's going to be enough people out there trying to sabotage you. I say, Stack, you're wrong. D-Jack was wrong. You repeated something. I said, think about it, Stack. You repeated a 50-page paragraph, and then the last paragraph, you like, well, that's the point. No, I say, Stacks, I'll give you an example. I say, you know how we feel about the Confederacy. When people mention Robert E. Lee, they mention Stonewall Jackson. They say some of the Lee tactics are still used today for today's military. I don't give a damn about that. He owned slaves. He tried to keep my ancestors oppressed. Why do I care about what his military tactics are being used today? That's how the Jewish community feels about Adolf Hitler. I say, Stacks, what we're trying to build is allies. We don't need adversaries. Skip, this is what I did. I said, Stacks, let me ask you a question. I said, did you drive to the games when you played in the NBA? He's like, yeah, I said, how many times did you stop off at the park and play somebody one-on-one? He's like, no, I wouldn't do that. I said, we go into the bigger fight, and you picking fights along the way. For what? It makes no sense. I said, they can be our biggest allies. Why are we trying to make them an adversary? Why are we trying to start a fire that there is no fire there? I say, what this movement is about we're trying to gain equality for everybody. So if whites want to come along, that feel that their voices not being heard, join on. Asians, the LGBT community, trans, I don't care, Skip, I don't care. In any movement that excludes anyone, I'm out. I don't care what it is. It can be BLM, it can be HLM, it can be H&M. I don't care. Because I'm trying to gain what's right for everybody that feels that they're in the minority and their voices don't get heard and their faces don't get seen. That's what I'm about. I say, Stack, don't sabotage this. I say, bro, you're a powerful voice. You don't realize how powerful your voice is. I said, but don't undermine your own cause. I said, you and D-Jack were wrong. And you made a point when you didn't have to attribute it to him. Make the point. Talk about black empowerment. Yes, we need to spend more in the black community. Yes, we need to be more united. Absolutely, 1,000% Stacks. But you could have said that. D-Jack could have said that without ever mentioning that Jack tail name. Period. So you're wrong. Don't repeat, oh, I'm doubling down on everything D-Jack said, because everything D-Jack said was not right. One little snippet was right. Miss me with everything else.
He's got the same.
Wow. Hey, Undisputed, if you don't watch it on Fox, you need to check it out. Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless. I love Shannon. I think he's right on there. The idea that one distractor, that's what those on the outside will use to discredit the movement. He spoke about sabotaging. We are in a moment where people are looking to steal our momentum, to sabotage this movement. And I'm afraid to say that those on the outside listen. You won't change them. That's fine. It's those on the inside. That's where the problem is. That's where we have to be careful. That's where we have to be wise. That's where we have to understand that everyone is not an activist. Everyone should not have a microphone. The movement can only be sustained and successful if it stays on message. If it stays on message. The question is, do you know the message? And I'm sad to say that I think many don't know the message. You're new to the message. You can't articulate the message. The only way you can stay on the message, and I'm going to give you 7 things. 7 things that will keep this movement alive. Because listen, Black Lives Matter will always be. It's enduring. It's been an emphasis for 401 years for Black and brown people. But I'm talking about this current movement. 7 things. Number 1, know your history. There's so many Black people that do not know their own history. It's a shame. I'm just going to tell you, you don't know your own history. How can we have victory if you don't know your history? How can we? Number 2, understand the facts of that history. The facts of that history. We got a lot of pseudo historians in the Black community. Few do research. Few give the effort and the time to know the facts of that history. And then learn how to articulate those facts. Just because you know it, you understand the facts, don't mean you can articulate them. Doesn't mean that you can synthesize them in a way that you can share that knowledge. Number 4, know that you are a piece. You are a piece in this large puzzle for social justice. You're just a piece. You're not the puzzle. These pseudo activists get up now and they're the puzzle. They're the second coming. They're going to lead you to where? Off a cliff. Because they don't know their history. They don't know the facts of their history. And when they open up their mouths, you know they can't articulate their history. Because they're hurting the movement. And this is a big one. Number 5, defeat your ego. Because what happens a lot of times is these pseudo activists, they're narcissists anyway. It's all about them. They want to be out front. They want people to utter their names. You know who they are. I could name them off right now, but it would do no good. It would be like I'm wasting my breath even by uttering their names because, listen, folks, when the smoke clears, they will not be here. When all the passion and the outrage goes away and the struggle continues on, they will be nowhere to be seen. Because it was their ego that brought them to the front to begin with. It ain't that they saw your suffering. It ain't that they saw that you were being discriminated against. It ain't that they felt the pain of what it means to be Black in this country. No, it is their ego that brought them, their narcissism that brought them up, their hubris that brought them to the front to speak. They're a joke, they're laughable. And we don't have time for comedy. If I want comedy, I look at a Netflix special. I don't have time. This game is too serious. This is a game where many have prepared themselves for, many have been in the struggle, many have taken the heat for keeping the dream alive. But you come and you the interpreter of the dream now, huh? Number 6, move beyond passion and outrage towards strategy. Strategy. That's where we're at now. We all been passion and outrage with strategy. Passion and outrage won't get it done. It'll get us there, but it won't get it done. Passion and outrage will get us, guess what, folks, up to bat, but it won't help us hit a wrong home run. Strategy, technique, practice, knowing and understanding the moment. If I could only get through to some of you that have stepped on this stage, you need to step off. Need to get educated. Need to know your history. Understand the facts of your history. Learn how to articulate those facts. Know that you are peace. Humble yourself. You are peace. Be thankful you are peace. Put your ego to rest. Move into strategy in the last one. And accept that activists are not created overnight. They are mentored and trained over many years. Mentored and trained over many years. How to stop a movement. The outside forces are going to be there anyway. They're the naysayers, the ones that are going to try to divert attention away from the message. They're going to be there anyway. There is no reason not to expect that. However, the inside, we need to welcome all people into this movement. Embrace them all. We need allies. I'm thankful for our allies. But we need to be able to lead and direct this movement for change. It is Black and brown people that know their history, that understands the facts of that history, that can articulate that history, are the ones that are capable of doing just that. If you don't find yourself in that space, then move to the back. Get trained, get mentored, humble yourself. And one day, it took us 401 years to get here. You think we're going to be out of this next year? Or in the next 10 years? Or in the next 20 years? This is going to take us generations. And if anyone is telling you anything different, they're lying to you. Matter of fact, some of us will not even see it with our own eyes. I'm hoping I see some change. I'm hoping I see some level of equality, some level of Black empowerment and Black economic success. I'm hoping to see that. Better education, better health outcomes. I'm hoping to see some of that. But will I see the full change? No way. But we are in this struggle because we understand it is bigger than us. It's not just about right now, it's about the future. Not just the future of Black and brown kids, but the future of all kids. How to stop a movement. We are in too serious of a moment to let these people keep playing around. If this has hit your conscience the way that I hope it does, or you know someone that needs to hear this, you need to send it to them because they need to understand that what they are doing is problematic. We need true soldiers, not wannabe soldiers. The time is now, because history will speak of us. Somewhere in the distant future, a scribe will reach down deep into the archives of our time, and what will she find? Will she discover that we overcame our differences? Will she find that out of many, we became one? Or will she find that we solved nothing and remain a divided people? Yes, history will speak of us.
We can make a difference if we try. We can be the change that's in our lives. All we gotta do is work together. We gotta raise our children better. We gotta stop the hate, and spread the love.
One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. Your choice.
Thank you for downloading the One Mic, One Voice show. This episode is brought to you by Blackened Studios. To learn more about Blackened Studios, go to blackenedstudios.com or visit their Facebook page. The views and opinions of the One Mic, One Voice podcast show do not reflect the views of Blackened Studios or our other sponsors.